The last assault on the Rhine. I remember the sound of the water before I remembered the sound of the guns. The way the current moved, black and restless, whispering secrets no man would ever hear again. It was colder than anything I'd ever felt, and I knew the moment I stepped into it that if the bullets didn't get me, the river might. We were crossing the Rhine, March of 1945, and the war was supposed to be over soon. Everyone said the Germans were finished, that they were on their last legs. But as we launched our assault boats into that cursed water, it sure as hell didn't feel like it. The sky was black, the air smelled of burning diesel and wet canvas, and somewhere in the darkness, machine guns waited. I gripped my rifle, knuckles white against the stock, my fingers so numb they barely felt the cold anymore. The boat rocked beneath us, shifting with every breath of the river, and I caught the eye of my best friend, Wolf Foster. He smirked, just barely, a flicker of teeth in the dim glow of the moon. We both knew better than to talk. Words were for later, for when the fight was over, if there was a later. Then the first shots rang out. The sound of bullets hitting water is different from what you'd expect. It's sharp, like the snapping of bones, like something breaking that shouldn't. I saw the man in front of me jerk backward, his head snapping like a marionette whose strings had just been cut. Blood sprayed the river, vanishing into the dark. No screams, just the sudden emptiness where a man used to be. Paddle, goddammit, someone hissed, and we did, pulling hard against the current, the wood of our paddles slick with cold and sweat and maybe blood. The shore was close now, but close wasn't close enough. More shots, more splashes. A boat behind us went up in flames. Must have been a mortar or a tracer round. The fire lit up the night for just a second, long enough for me to see Will's face again, his smirk gone. He was looking at me, eyes wide, as if trying to say something without speaking. And then he fell. No scream, no struggle. 1 second he was there, the next he was sliding into the water, vanishing beneath the surface. I reached for him, my fingers barely brushing his sleeve before the current took him. And just like that, he was gone. I wanted to stop to jump in after him, but there was no time. The shore was right there, German fire hammering down on us. And the only thing keeping me alive was the fact that I kept moving. I hit the bank hard, scrambling up into the mud, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Behind me, the river churned, swallowing the bodies of men I had known. Ahead of me, the war was still waiting. The air smelled of mud and cordite, a thick, choking mix that clung to the back of my throat as I pressed myself against the embankment. My heart was still hammering from the crossing, but there was no time to dwell on it. The Germans weren't giving us a second to breathe. Machine guns rattled from the tree line, bullets snapping against the wet ground, sending up sprays of dirt and shredded leaves. I could barely make out the others around me, dark shapes moving low, hugging the earth as they fought to stay alive. Someone was barking orders, maybe the captain, maybe just some poor bastard trying to keep us from dying in the first 2 minutes of being ashore. The only thought pounding through my skull was Will. I had seen him fall, seen the water close over him. But that wasn't how it was supposed to happen. We had promised each other a drink in Cologne once this war was over. A drink, a damn steak, something normal. And now he was just gone, taken by the river like so many others. Lieutenant, someone grabbed my shoulder, yanking me back to the present. It was Harris, one of the younger guys, his face smeared with mud, his eyes wide and bloodshot. We have to move. They're zeroing in on us. He was right. The longer we stayed pinned here, the worse it would get. I forced the grief down, shoved it into that part of me. I didn't let myself look at it until the fighting was done. "Where's the captain?" I asked. "Dead." The word landed like a blow, but it wasn't unexpected. We had seen too many officers die to be surprised anymore. I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. We pushed forward. Use the trees for cover. Move in pairs, keep low. Harris, take point. He hesitated just for a second, and I knew what he was thinking. He wanted to say something about Will, about the captain, about how none of this made sense anymore. But there was no time for that. We had a job to do, and if we stopped, we were dead. He nodded. "Yes, sir." We moved. The mud sucked at our boots as we crawled forward, inch by inch. The gunfire hadn't let up, but was shifting, scattering as the Germans adjusted their aim. Someone must have made it farther inland, drawing their fire. That was our chance. The trees were close now. I could see them dark and twisted against the night sky. Safety, or at least something close to it. Then the mortars started falling. The first one hit to our right, throwing up a wall of dirt and shrapnel. The second landed so close I felt the heat of it against my face. Someone screamed. I didn't know who. I just kept moving. I don't remember standing up, but I must have, because 1 second I was crawling through the mud, and the next I was running, my boots sinking into the earth with every step as if the ground itself wanted to pull me under. The mortars were coming faster now, each explosion hammering into my skull, filling my lungs with smoke and dirt. The night had become chaos, figures moving through the haze, some charging forward, others falling and not getting back up. I could hear men shouting, orders mixed with prayers, curses tangled with cries of pain, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was reaching those damn trees, getting out of the open before the next shell found me. I was almost there when I heard it, low, ragged moan coming from somewhere to my left. I nearly kept running, but something in that sound made me stop. Turning my head, I saw him lying in the mud, half buried in the churned-up earth. Harris. The blast must have caught him in the side, because his uniform was dark and wet, and he wasn't moving right, his limbs twitching like a man in a fever dream. His eyes found mine, and there was something there, something pleading, something desperate. I hesitated. It was suicide to stop now. The Germans were still firing, still dropping mortars into the field, and every second I wasted was another chance for them to kill me. But I couldn't leave him, not after Will, not after everything. I dropped to my knees beside him, grabbing his vest, trying to haul him up. He groaned, his body stiff with pain, but he clung to me, fingers digging into my sleeve as if he knew, just as well as I did, that he wouldn't make it out of here on his own. Somewhere behind us, another shell hit, the shockwave rolling through the ground like a living thing. I threw myself forward, covering Harris as best I could, feeling the heat of it rush over us. Dirt rained down, stinging my skin, getting in my mouth, my eyes, but we were still alive. Come on, I gritted out, forcing my legs to move, forcing myself to ignore the weight of him slowing me down. Just a little farther. The trees were so close I could almost touch them. I could see shadows moving between them, our guys, the ones who had made it. If I could just get us there, if we could just disappear into the woods, we might stand a chance. I pulled Harris forward, step by agonizing step, until at last, we were in the cover of the trees. Someone grabbed me, helping drag Harris the rest of the way, and I collapsed against a thick trunk, my breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. I turned my head, looking at Harris, and my stomach sank. His chest wasn't moving. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at anything anymore. I had gotten him here, but I hadn't been fast enough. I swallowed hard, shoving the thought away. There was no time to mourn, no time to think about what it meant. I had men still alive, and we had a fight ahead of us. Someone pressed a rifle into my hands, and I took it without thinking. The night wasn't over yet. The forest was alive with movement, but not the kind that brought comfort. Shadows flickered between the trees, figures darting through the underbrush, some ours, some not. The gunfire had slowed, not because the fighting was done, but because both sides were moving into a new phase, the kind where the wrong step could mean a knife in the dark or a muzzle flash 2 feet from your face. The Germans weren't giving up. We had crossed the river, yes, but now we had to hold this ground, and they were not going to let us have it without taking as many of us with them as they could. I wiped the mud from my eyes with a sleeve that was already soaked in things I didn't want to think about. Harris was gone. Will was gone. The captain was dead. That left me and a handful of men who were looking to me for what came next. The weight of it pressed against my ribs, made it harder to breathe in even the thick air full of smoke and blood. I was just a lieutenant, not a hero, not some battlefield genius. I was just a man who had survived long enough to still be standing when others had fallen. But that was the thing about war. It didn't care what you thought you were. It only cared about what you did next. I forced myself to my feet, my legs protesting every inch of movement. The night was heavy, the cold settling into my bones despite the sweat clinging to my skin. The trees gave us cover, but they also made it impossible to see what was ahead. Somewhere deeper in the woods, the Germans were regrouping, maybe even preparing for a counterattack. If we didn't move first, they would. I scanned the faces around me, I called Jennings, Martinez, a few others whose names I didn't even know. They were all waiting, expecting something from me. I gestured for them to move, keeping low, spreading out. The last thing we needed was to be bunched up when the enemy decided to make their next move. We crept forward, our boots silent against the damp ground, the distant sounds of war still raging beyond the trees. I could hear the river behind us, still whispering its cruel secrets, still carrying away the dead. A snap. Too loud to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The others did the same, instinct taking over. My grip on the rifle tightened, every nerve of my body screaming at me to be ready. Then movement. A flash of metal in the moonlight. The distinct shape of a helmet, a rifle, a body moving through the trees. Not one, not two. A whole squad, slipping toward us, quiet as death. For one terrible second, none of us moved. None of us breathed. The Germans hadn't seen us yet. If we fired, we would give away our position. If we waited too long, they would walk right over us. I felt the sweat slide down my back, cold as ice. Then, before I could think, before I could plan, before I could doubt, someone opened fire. The woods exploded into chaos. Gunfire cracked through the trees, turning the night into a storm of muzzle flashes and screams. The Germans shouted something, orders, curses, maybe prayers, but I didn't have time to listen. The second that first shot was fired, everything turned to pure survival. I hit the ground, rolling behind the thick roots of an old oak as bullets tore through the air where I had just been standing. Jennings wasn't so lucky. I saw him jerk backward, his rifle slipping from his fingers as he crumpled into the dirt, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. Someone else was shouting, maybe McCall, maybe Martinez, I couldn't tell. The sounds of the forest had vanished, swallowed up by the fight, by the raw, desperate violence of men trying to kill each other before they themselves were killed. I pressed my back against the tree, forcing myself to think. We were outnumbered, that much was clear. The Germans had at least twice our numbers, and they had caught us off guard. If we stayed here, they'd surround us, pick us off one by one. We needed to move. McCall, I yelled over the gunfire, glancing toward where I had last seen him. He was crouched behind a fallen log, reloading with shaking hands, his face pale beneath the grime and sweat. We have to fall back. Get to higher ground. He nodded, but before he could move, another burst of fire split the air. The round slammed into the log, splintering wood into deadly shards. He flinched, ducking lower, but then his eyes widened. He pointed frantically past me, his mouth opening in a warning I never got the chance to hear. A shadow loomed behind me. I spun just as the German soldier lunged, his rifle swinging like a club. I barely got my own weapon up in time, the impact jarring my arms, knocking the breath from my lungs. We staggered, locked in a brutal, clumsy struggle. He was young, maybe 19, maybe younger, his face twisted with something that might have been rage or terror or both. For a split second, I saw will in his eyes. Then my training took over. I drove my knee into his gut, twisting my rifle free, and without thinking, without hesitation, I pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. He stiffened, a small, breathy sound escaping his lips before he crumpled against me. His weight nearly took me down with him, but I shoved him away, my hand shaking, my pulse roaring in my ears. No time to think. No time to feel. I turned back to my men. Move. Now. McCall and Martinez didn't hesitate. We broke for the ridge, sprinting through the trees, ducking and weaving as bullets snapped past us. The Germans were regrouping, pushing forward, but we had the advantage now. The land sloped upward ahead, offering better ground, a defensible position. If we could make it. Martinez stumbled, his foot catching on something, and he hit the dirt hard. I grabbed him by the collar, hauling him up, my muscles screaming in protest. He gasped something in Spanish, his breath ragged, but he didn't resist. We kept running. The gunfire didn't stop. The Germans were right behind us, but we were almost there. Just a few more steps. And then, just as we reached the top of the ridge, just as I thought we might have a chance, a flare went up, bright, blinding, and in its burning light, I saw what waited for us on the other side. Not safety, not salvation, but something far, far worse. The flare hissed as it soared upward, its harsh white glow carving away the darkness, turning the forest into a battlefield frozen in stark, unnatural light. Shadows stretched and twisted across the ridge, and for the first time since we had made landfall, I saw just how deep in hell we really were. Below us, spread out in a rough line, was an entire German defensive position, sandbags, dugouts, machine gun nests, and men. Dozens of them. Maybe more. They had been waiting. Not for us specifically, but for any American unit trying to push inland. And now, thanks to that damn flare, we had run straight into their sights. McCall sucked in a sharp breath beside me, and I didn't have to look at him to know what he was thinking. Martinez was cursing under his breath in Spanish, his fingers tightening around his rifle. We were exposed. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. If we went back down, the Germans behind us would cut us to pieces. If we stayed, the ones ahead would do the same. For a heartbeat, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath. The Germans below hadn't fired yet, but they were moving, shouting to one another, scrambling for weapons. Maybe they hadn't expected us to be this close. Maybe they were caught off guard by the suddenness of our arrival. It didn't matter. That hesitation wouldn't last. I made the only choice I could. Fire. My own rifle kicked against my shoulder as I pulled the trigger, the first shot snapping across the ridge. The others followed a second later, McCall and Martinez opening up beside me. The Germans who had been scrambling for position suddenly found themselves caught in their own trap. The defensive line turned into chaos as bullets tore through the sandbags, ricocheting off helmets, slamming into flesh. It wouldn't last. We had the element of surprise, but only for seconds. The enemy would recover, and when they did, we were dead men. I barely had time to register the thought before the machine guns roared to life. The night exploded with tracer fire. The ridge we had just fought so hard to reach became a killing ground, rounds ripping through the trees, shredding bark and bodies alike. I threw myself flat, dirt and splinters stinging my face. Somewhere to my right, Martinez let out a sharp, guttural cry. I turned just in time to see him clutching his leg, blood already soaking through his fatigues. I grabbed his collar, dragging him toward the only cover we had, a shallow depression in the earth, barely more than a dip, but better than nothing. McCall was already there, reloading with frantic hands, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "We can't stay here," he shouted over the gunfire. "They'll flank us." He was right. The Germans weren't just shooting, they were moving, shifting to encircle us. In another minute, we'd be caught in a crossfire, cut down like animals. I looked at Martinez. His breathing was ragged, his face pale, but his hands were steady as he gripped his rifle. He knew as well as I did what this meant. He wouldn't be able to run. For a second, I thought about Harris, about how I had tried to save him, how it hadn't been enough, how the river had taken Will, and how I had been helpless to stop it. I wasn't going to let it happen again. "We hold," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. "We hold until backup gets here." McCall gave me a look that was part disbelief, part bitter amusement. "And what if it doesn't?" I chambered another round, feeling the weight of the rifle in my hands, the exhaustion in my bones. "Then we make them pay for every damage." The words barely left my lips before the next wave came. The Germans charged. They moved quickly, confidently, using the darkness between the bursts of bullets as cover. This was no longer a chaotic barrage. This was a well-coordinated assault. They knew we were few. They knew we were drained of blood. They knew they had to simply crush us en masse. I pressed myself into the ground, the butt of the rifle pressed against my shoulder. My heart was beating so loudly that it seemed even those who were attacking could hear it. My breathing was heavy, my arms were tense, but I could still shoot, and as long as I could shoot, we were still alive. The first target was a soldier with a grenade, crouching behind a boulder. I pulled the trigger, and his body jerked back sharply. The second target was an officer with a pistol, shouting orders. A shot and he fell, his voice cut off with life. But there were too many of them. McCall was shouting something, his words lost in the gunfire. Martinez, wounded though he was firing his last rounds, gritting his teeth in pain. I saw him try to get up, but his leg gave out. He fell to his knee, his fingers gripping his rifle convulsively. Another rocket went off, another, then another. The sky above us became as bright as day. Now they could see us clearly. Now there was no point in hiding. I heard a short, piercing sound, a machine gun burst. Martinez flinched. For a moment his eyes met mine, and there was no fear in them, only resignation. He staggered back and fell. I don't know what came over me, but the cold that had been squeezing me from the inside was gone, giving way to something else. Anger, fury, fatigue. The feeling that I was no longer going to just watch everything around me die. I jumped out of cover, feeling my hand automatically reload my rifle. Shoot, move, shoot, move. I saw their faces, distorted with surprise and fear as one by one they fell into the mud. McCall wasn't hiding either. He was right next to me, his mouth open in a battle cry, the bullets raining down around him like hail. He was cutting his way forward like a madman until he fell. I rushed at him, grabbing his collar, but he just shook his head. I understood. Go, he whispered, and his eyes were no longer the eyes of a man who thinks he will survive. I didn't answer. I just got up and ran. The bullets tore the ground under my feet, but I was breaking through the chaos, through the fire, through the screams. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of engines, saw flashes in the sky. Reinforcements. But it was too late for us. I don't remember finding myself back at the riverbank. My hands were covered in blood, whose blood I didn't know. I was gasping for breath, my lungs burning with smoke, my body shaking with exhaustion. And then I saw it. The Rhine. The water was black as night, deep. It was carrying bodies, Americans, Germans, it didn't matter. It was carrying them far away, taking away everything that was left of them in this world. I knelt down, staring into the current. It seemed calm. It never stopped. I survived. But a part of me remained there on that damn bank. And as I looked out at the water, I realized the war might have ended on the general's maps, but for those who had seen it all happen with their own eyes, it would never end. And the Rhine continued to flow.